welcome back to another video. So if you are an artist here on YouTube, or an artist in general, or you watch a lot of Twitch streams, you may know who Bob Ross is. He is a Canadian artist. He's long past now, rest in peace, but he is a wonderful Canadian artist that developed the show called The Joy of Painting, and he is a wonderful softly spoken artist that paints a lot of landscapes and teaches you how to use oils to create a landscape in a much more simple fashion than trying to add detail to a painting. And I, for one, find him very relaxing to watch. Like I say, on Twitch, there is a constant live stream of Bob Ross, and you can probably find all his Joy of Painting shows on Netflix, I believe, or they used to be, I don't know anymore. And he's just wonderful to use. I have replicated some of his paintings multiple times, and a lot of YouTubers have actually. I know Evan and Caitlin have, I know Draw with Jazza has, and they've done different takes on them, like doing them in the dark, doing contrasting colours, just listening to him and painting them. And rather than replicate those types of videos, I thought it would be really interesting to see how he paints using his, he calls it his liquid white. I think it's quite a common thing in oil painting, but you can in fact buy Bob Ross's liquid white. Now, in the past, when I have replicated his paintings, I have made my own liquid white using turpentine and white oil paint to create my liquid white. Now, I don't know if that was a DIY way of doing it that I googled and found on the internet. Now, I'd really love to know what makes Bob Ross's liquid white special. Is it better than turpentine and white oil paint? That is what we are going to find out today. I thought it'd be really interesting, a little bit of fun. We're gonna paint a painting, not necessarily follow a Bob Ross tutorial, but if that's something you want to see, do let me know in the comments below. But I just thought it'd be really interesting to see how it differs and whether you need to spend the extortionate amount of money on Bob Ross's liquid white or whether you can just make your own. So let's get cracking. Let's test this out and see if it's any good. Alright, so a quick little disclaimer before we get started. I am not an accomplished artist with oil paint, and I've only ever followed Bob Ross tutorials about 3 times in my entire life. So just at the end, when you look at the finished result, there obviously is going to be differences because my skill and technique is not quite accomplished and polished. But putting that aside, I think this is actually a very good video to show you the differences and show you whether it is worth getting the Bob Ross or just making your own homemade liquid white. So, straight off the bat, I noticed the Bob Ross liquid white was somewhat thinner but creamier. It definitely had a really nice consistency to it, whereas mine, I undermixed it, it was a little bit lumpy, and it was, I would say, it felt thinner to put on, but as I'm painting, it felt very different. So as you can see here, I did forget to paint the initial part when using the Bob Ross one, annoyingly. So there is a little bit more footage of me painting this white on than there is for my homemade version, but it will flick to be at the same point very shortly. But just painting this initial part here, my homemade version here, I didn't feel was wet. As you can see, it's almost erring on being a little bit dry brushy rather than that nice wet on wet technique. But as you can see now, it's flipped to the Bob Ross painting, underpainting. The Bob Ross one was almost a little bit too wet. It was over mixing with that white, so all my colours were ending up a little bit faded. They weren't as bright and vibrant. I was using the same colours, I was using the same technique as there or thereabouts, and I did just find that the Bob Ross overmixed. It blended very lovely because of that, but it was overmixed. I couldn't get those nice vibrant colours, which I thought was a shame. But all in all, I would say they're performing at a decent rate, kind of in comparison. Then moving on to these clouds, it was really lovely to use this on here actually. I felt like I was able to get that lovely soft blend with both of them. Like I say, my homemade one, it was ever so slightly not as wet, so I could lay down that white a lot better. I could get a thicker, more opaque white colour than I was able to on the Bob Ross itself. Now, it depends on the painter, I guess, whether you prefer it to be over blended or whether you prefer to have a bit more control with the homemade version, because obviously if you're not able to blend it out as much with the homemade one, you could just add a little bit more turpentine to it to soften it a little bit more. But as you can see, the Bob Ross clouds ended up way more softer, way better, and overall just very, very nice. Now, if you are wanting to follow this tutorial in general, I don't think it's any longer free on Netflix, which it used to be. You have to now buy it. I think Prime sells them episode by episode, so I did have to buy this episode, and this is the episode season 15 episode 13 of The Joy of Painting. It's called Peaks of Majesty. That's what I was following, and my version looks nothing like Bob's, and I was doing it on a much smaller canvas, so I was not able to add as much into this painting, but I do think it turned out quite nice. So for these mountains, again, I'm using the same colours, but as you can see here, as I'm blending the mountain on my homemade version, it's suddenly like my liquid white became a little bit too wet on there, and it was over blending again. But luckily I wanted that soft look to the bottom there anyway, because we're putting over, I think this was like a burnt sienna and a white mixture. Again, they do differ slightly. I painted these at very different times, so my mixture ratios are very different. So on the left with the Bob Ross one, I added a little bit more sienna, and on the right I added a little bit more white. And obviously my mountains, were having a little bit of fun and just painting what we feel like, so they're never going to be the same, and they do look vastly different. Now, in terms of these mountains, I do prefer the ones on the Bob Ross side. However, I definitely like the way the greenery goes on the homemade side. But again, that is just down to skill. I was using the same colours, but for some reason on the Bob Ross side, they were very much more yellow and a bit more vibrant. But again, that was kind of mixing in with that white, the undertone of the liquid white, and it was creating a much lighter colour than I wanted, it was a bit frustrating at times. But again, maybe I painted my canvas a little bit too thick with the Bob Ross, I'm not sure, but I felt like I kind of gave them both the best shot, a most equal shot as I possibly could. But this was fun. It was definitely a chore to paint both of the same image. As much as I was enjoying it, it was very repetitive. It would have been nice to paint two different ones, but I obviously wanted to compare these as much as possible as like for like, and so it just meant that I had to paint the same painting twice. Now we are onto some happy little trees. Now, before I painted these, I did do some reflections, and a little bit later on you will see some more reflections very shortly actually, and I felt like the Bob Ross allowed me to blend those reflections and create that lovely wispy blurred look under the water that you would see, whereas on my homemade one I felt like I was able to lift the paint off my liquid white a bit too easily. As you can see there, I've removed some of that paint on that bottom bit, which is such a shame, whereas on the Bob Ross one I felt like the liquid white adhered to the canvas a bit better, and the paint adhered to it also very nicely. So that was another main difference I did notice. Now onto some more happy little trees here. I do apologise for the Bob Ross side. I painted it at an angle where it just kept focusing on my hand, and so you see less of the painting on that Bob Ross side. I do apologise, and I will make that change next time we do a comparison video like this. But all in all, and my final thoughts for this were, there were definitely take-backs for the Bob Ross and the homemade. Like I say, the Bob Ross felt a lot wetter, like you could manipulate a bit further, which at some points was great, at some points not so great. And my homemade was just a little bit rustic, and like I say, I do feel like the paint didn't adhere to it quite as well. So if you added a bit of turpentines on your brush, or it was a bit wet from cleaning them, it definitely made a difference as to how that paint would lay down, how it would react. And so all I can say is the Bob Ross Liquid White is a very expensive product. So if you are wanting to do this on the cheap or just practice a Bob Ross, 100% make it yourself. But if this is a technique you would like to pick up and take forward, then I do think the Bob Ross Liquid White is a massive advantage to you to help you get a consistent look across all your paintings. And that is it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed watching, and thank you very much for sticking around. And remember, there are no mistakes, just happy accidents. Goodbye.